Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm Mario Martinez Jr., CEO and founder of Ingresso, and your host for the Modern Sales Mastery Show. And I'm excited that you're with us today. We're going to be talking to leaders about how to lead your sales team in a remote selling environment. So sit back, enjoy this episode. And for you sales leaders out there, this is going to be some great information on how to lead an organization in a specifically a remote sales environment. So excited to be with you today. What I want to do is I want to get started right away and showcasing to you these particular slides, and you should hopefully see them right about now. Here we go. So, leading a virtual sales team to achieve quota, unfortunately, whether or not we are in COVID or not, virtual sales will be here to stay. Virtual sales will be here to stay. With that in mind, I want to make sure that you guys are following us on Ingresso. So up above on your screen, you're going to see a couple things pop up. Very specifically, if you want to be able to learn about virtual selling, remote selling, selling with LinkedIn training specifically, learning how to leverage video to be able to engage in your omni-channel approach to prospecting, then you're going to make sure you follow us. Make sure you click on follow on youtube.com. We've got a tremendous amount of assets. Subscribe to that channel and turn on alerts. Subscribe to that channel and turn on alerts. And without a doubt, make sure you follow on LinkedIn.com as well. Follow on LinkedIn.com as well. And you will make sure that you grab some great motivational tips every single day, along with some great content as well. All right, let's get started into the discussion. A few episodes ago, we talked about today's modern buyer and seller. And we talked about the interesting situation that we are in right now with respects to modern buying and modern selling. And we said that there are 4 cardinal attributes of today's modern buyer. Number 1, they're digitally connected. Number 2, they're socially engaged. Number 3, they're mobile attached. And number 4, they're video hungry. And if you look at every one of our sellers today as a leader, guess what? Our sellers are doing the exact same thing. They are digitally connected, socially engaged, mobile attached, and they should be video producers. So never before in the history of buying and selling have these 4 cardinal attributes. The buying motion have been perfectly aligned with the selling motion as well. Both buyer and seller are digitally connected, socially engaged, mobile attached, and video hungry or consuming and or video producers. So this is an interesting time that we're in right now. Yet, in a virtual selling environment, most of our sales folks are feeling very dissatisfied. Let's talk about remote selling or also known as virtual selling. There are 3 things that we're going to cover here today. Number 1, we're going to talk about ineffective sales engagement. Number 2, ineffective sales training. And number 3, ineffective sales coaching. Those are the 3 things that we're going to spend time talking about in terms of how to be able to better lead a sales organization in a remote selling environment or a virtual selling environment. So what I want to show you now is I want you to meet Bob. And I want to take you through examples of emails that I receive every single day as someone who is being prospected to. Let's take a look and let's meet Bob. Bob sends me an email and says, "Hi Mario, are you familiar with," his company name, "I'd like to schedule a virtual demo and I am eager to meet you." Now, I appreciate Bob's outreach here. I don't know who your company is, and why do I care specifically that you would like to schedule a virtual demo with me and that you're eager to meet me? I don't care yet as a buyer, someone who you're reaching out to for the first time. What do I care about? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that in just a moment, but let's continue reading on about Bob's message to me. He then says the solution that he has is made up of, and now goes into an entire couple sentences all about product features and product dump to me as a potential prospect. All right, what are we seeing here now in this message? This is his first touch. This is his outreach to me as a potential buyer. It's all about, do you know my company? I, product, 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 product. Now we go on and says, here, let me learn what we define as must-have intranet features. You're talking about features and functions now as a sales rep in your first touch point. And I may not even care about these features or functions. What I care about is a business problem that you solve. Yet, every single day, I receive emails from your sellers just like this. In addition to that, he wants to take the time to talk about how he can help. And that might be great because you might be able to help, but you've lost me now in the first 2 paragraphs that you've written because you have not focused on me as your buyer. Then he says, let me know when you're available for a demo and free trial. We go into the free trial. This is all about spraying and praying. And very specifically, for those of you who've watched our content before, you know that the cardinal sin when reaching out to book a meeting is never, ever, never, ever, never, ever say, let me know when you're available. I'm a very busy executive. My schedule is scheduled out at least 2 weeks in advance, at least 2 weeks in advance. And telling you a date and time I'm available is like finding a needle in a haystack. No, what you're responsible for doing is engaging correctly using the PVC sales method, pvcsalesmethod.com, and it'll take you through on how you're supposed to close out a proper call to action with both a meeting link, using a meeting link, as well as putting together 3 dates and times for us to be able to meet. So that is Bob. And finally, I mentioned this a second ago, we go straight into demo and free trial. Ladies and gentlemen, sales managers, sales directors, vice presidents, CSOs, CROs, sales enablement leaders. This is what our sellers are sending out. This is where we need to make improvement at, especially in a virtual environment. This is not, I repeat, this is not the way to engage with a buyer. So we want to make sure that we're taking the time to understand what our sellers are doing. What is the right way to be able to engage with our buyers? And oh, by the way, in the odd event that I actually wanted to speak with Bob actually left me no phone number to call on his auto signature. And guess what? There's still a large percentage of our buyers who are willing to pick up the phone. So we got to make sure that we understand what our sellers are actually doing in the field. What are they sending? How are they communicating? And sales leaders, we've got a great resource for you. It's called the PVC Sales Method. And if you go to pvcsalesmethod.com, you'll land on a phenomenal article that takes you through how to personalize, how to bring value, and how to include a call to action. So let's talk about the PVC sales method. What does the P stand for in the PVC? Well, you heard me say it, how to personalize. Personalize. We want to make sure that when our reps are reaching out through electronic communication, that you're inspecting what you would expect. And that is that they're adding some level of personalization to the actual message. Now, there are 2 ways to personalize a message. Way number 1 is you personalize to the individual. It might be something very specific. Example, yesterday, there was a senior executive that engaged with one of my individual LinkedIn posts that was about diversity in sales. I had no idea who this person was, yet they engaged with me. My immediate engagement back with them was to connect with them and use that post as a way to be able to connect, talking about diversity in sales and some of the challenges that we see with respects to diversity. That is a way to be able to personalize and individualize a connection with a potential buyer. But not in all cases. In many cases, you may not be able to get that, quote, personalized touch. So what do you do then? Well, you personalize to the persona. And you heard me say this before a few episodes ago, and I said something to the effect of, if you lined up 100 sales reps and ask them, what business problem do we solve in one sentence? Two, maybe three out of 100 would be able to easily answer the question, what business problem you solve? So we want to make sure that when we are reaching out to a potential buyer, that we're at least personalizing to the persona or personalizing to the individual pain. For example, here at Vingresso, we help sales leaders and sales teams create more sales conversations. So the pain that we solve is that first meeting, getting that first meeting, booking more meetings, prospecting, prospecting, prospecting. That's one of the number one complaints by sales folks, as well as all polls previously identified that more than 70% of sellers and sales leaders are saying getting the first conversation is the hardest thing. So our pain that we solve very specifically is how to get that first meeting. So when I or my sellers reach out to a VP of sales or a sales enablement leader, we might say, generally when we speak to sales leaders such as yourself, they have two common problems. Number one, they are trying to create more sales conversations. And number two, they need to build more sales pipeline. That's the pain. That's the problem. So at a very minimum, I am personalizing to that individual persona and to the pain that I solve through my particular services. All right. So now we move into, we've personalized it. How do we bring value to the discussion? And this is what you as a sales leader really want to be thinking about when you're inspecting what it is that you would expect from your sellers in terms of engaging with buyers. Now we move on into the value. And with value, we want to make sure that we understand the pain that we solve for the customer and that we're using content to actually address that particular pain. Content that we might use is something from, as an example, from our marketing organization. Our marketing organization may produce blogs, ebooks, white papers, webinars, those types of assets that can help us as a selling community to bring valuable content to address a specific problem. For example, Vingresso just launched the ultimate guide to building a sales pipeline, as well as the definitive guide for sales forecasting. Okay, so these are particular areas or challenges that our sales leaders are asking for to provide help. So if one of our sellers was reaching out, we might say, oh, by the way, here is a blog or a webinar or a video that actually provides answers the question how to increase your sales forecast accuracy, as an example. How can you build sales pipeline faster earlier in the year? Great. So now we're using content to bring value to the conversation. This is very important. Now, generally, you want to try to tie that value to the product pain that you solve. The pain that you solve, in our case, is creating more sales conversations. Then we want to have video, ebooks, white papers that are associated with solving those particular pains. Okay? And finally, we get to what's called the CTA, the call to action. Now, this call to action is super important to understand. Most of our sellers want to go straight into what's called book a meeting. But in many cases, we can't get to booking that meeting with a potential buyer simply because we haven't earned the right yet to do that. So we really want to get you and your sellers thinking about different types of CTAs. As an example, you might ask a question to solicit a response. You might ask for their opinion on something. You might invite them to a meeting or to an event. So we have, as an example, CTAs that include things like, I'm curious to understand, how are you solving, and you fill in the blank. Or another CTA might be an event like, our CEO, Mario Martinez, would love to invite you to. And in this case, it might be to our Vingresso Live event. It might be to a podcast, whatever it might be. So thinking of that, you want to get your sellers thinking about these different types of call to actions that would allow the buyer and seller to begin an engagement process. That's the key, to begin an engagement process. So that's the cornerstone of the PVC sales methodology. And for really teaching our sellers how to get the right level of engagement, we've got to fix the problem of those electronic messages, whether they be through InMail or whether they be through email, making sure that they've got the P for personalization, the V for value, and the C with the proper call to action. When you leverage the PVC, your sellers will, in fact, begin to increase their engagement with buyers, which ultimately goes back to and helps solve one of the problems that you all said, 71% to be exact, that getting the first conversation has been the single hardest thing that you've had to deal with in a virtual selling environment. So let's go ahead and move on now to the next component, which is talking about ineffective sales training. Now, I'm sorry to say this, but most of us leaders have never had to deal with a global pandemic and have never taught and trained our sellers in a virtual selling environment skills that they needed to learn in a virtual selling transaction. So this is new information for a lot of us, because as sales leaders, we've always brought our teams in to a 2-day workshop, a sales kickoff, and train them in person. Let's talk a little bit about sales training. Now, we call this traditional sales training. In traditional sales training, which is our traditional 2-day workshops that we traditionally have always had, 1-day workshop, in-person training, whatever you want to call it, I want you to understand some interesting statistics that we knew about many years ago. This didn't happen as a direct result of the virtual selling environment that we're now all in as a result of COVID. We've always known this data, yet we continue to do things over and over and over again, expecting different results. Here's the crazy part. We knew as leaders that 70% of our B2B sales reps forgot the information they learned within a week worth of training. And that 87% of our sellers forgot the information they learned within a month worth of training. Let me put this in a different context. Have you ever said, gosh, we do all these trainings, they come in, and now next thing you know it, the next day, they're right back into their old bad habits. That's correct. They went right back into their old bad habits because they forgot what it is that they learned within a week to a month's worth of training. Yet we did training like this over and over and over again. Workshops, fly people in. And it was crazy and ludicrous to us at Vingresso, which is why we moved to a totally virtual instructor-led training program well over 2 years ago. Why? Well, if you look at the data shows that sellers will retain information if data is given to them over the course of 60 days. 80% of information, as a matter of fact, if it's given to them over the course of 60 days. It's called the spacing effect. Why do you think we have what's called semesters in high school or in college? Very easily. Because even the learning institutions know the way people learn is over the course of time, and you use it as a building block, piece by piece by piece, over the course of 3 to 4 months. Yet, we didn't apply that inside of sales training. Number 2, 65% of the information is retained after 3 days when you use video to engage with your learners. Okay, using these pieces of information, you might be saying, yeah, we virtual selling, we know that these statistics are there, but there's several pieces of data that you need to understand that we're going to break down inside here. One of them is all around the spacing effect, okay? So very important. You may have known this data, but the devil is in the detail, as they say, and we want to get into those details. So here are 3 techniques, sales leaders, that I want you thinking about, and you should march right back into your human resources team, whoever has training, or your sales enablement team, and leading the charge, you should be focusing in on these 3 techniques. Number 1, we call it the testing effect, or it's called the testing effect. Making sure that you've got frequent small tests throughout the entire program, along with post-program, that your sales reps are regularly using to recall information to make sure that it's ingrained in their long-term memory. Now, most of us have done a good job at this in the virtual selling environment, in virtual training. We have the tests that are there and it's pulling out information. It's making sure that we recall the data that's important, but you want to make sure that you're testing on this over and over and over again in different scenarios. So it's not just a one-time as you're going through an on-demand course or as you're going through like a 1 month or a 2 month learning program. It's that plus ongoing testing. Number 2, the spacing effect. Now, a lot of leaders have asked Vingresso, why is your modern sales mastery course generally over 3 months for one component and then over 2 months for another component? Well, the answer to that is because we know that students learn over the course of time. And the smaller chunks or bite-sized pieces of information that you can give to them with a minimum of 60 days, that then becomes now ingrained into their long-term memory. And research shows that it will actually change behavior for a program that lasts at least 60 days. Okay? So at least 60 days, when you have that, behavior changes and retention of information goes up to that 80th percentile and above. That's called the spacing effect. So if your onboarding program looks like a 3-day program virtually, it's wrong. If your new sales methodology that you're doing, and it's a 1-day workshop with 8 weeks of coaching, it's wrong. I'm sorry to say that, but you've got to think differently about the human behavior, the human study of how we learn and leverage what it is that we've always known for eons worth of time. The university system, quarters and semesters, have never changed for as long as I've been alive. And that is because so much research is out there that helps guide us on how people learn. You've got to implement that inside the business organization. And number 3, we call it the chunking technique. The chunking technique. Now, if you look at Vingresso's program, as an example, our Selling with LinkedIn program, or Selling with Sales Navigator program, the social selling training, it's actually over the course of basically about 6 phases. Now, what they say is that dividing sales training or education and training, you want to basically divide it into chunks, categories. No more than 7 categories. That's what you never want more than 7 categories. And it helps the brain to basically encode that information faster, more efficiently, and compartmentalize. So as an example, Vingresso has 6 phases to transforming a seller. We learned about that in one of the earlier episodes of the Modern Sales Mastery Show. And in that episode, we showed you the 6 phases, each of them lasting approximately 2 weeks long each. Mindset, how to rebrand yourself to engage through social, how to find and engage your buyers, how to connect with your buyers, that's phase number 4, how to then feed that network with valuable content, and then the cadence, the things that you're going to do on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. So we've divided our program into 6 different phases, otherwise known as chunks. And those chunks help our students understand when they're in the find and engage section of our training program, they're learning and remembering all the different techniques around find and engage, or connecting, or feeding their network with valuable content. So important sales leaders, as you're listening into this, make sure you go back to your sales enablement team and you look back at this and say, have we implemented the spacing effect? Are our programs a minimum of 60 days? And have we broken them down into different chunks? Chunks, i.e., as an example, no more than 7 chunks so that the brain can compartmentalize and learn information faster. Very important. These 3 things are techniques that will improve the long-term retention and most importantly, will help change seller behavior. And that's what we're looking at doing to make our sellers better in this virtual selling environment. So let's go on to the third thing that I promised that we'll talk about. That is a problem with us as leaders in this virtual selling environment. It's ineffective sales coaching. Yeah, I'm talking about you and I. All of us who are listening in right now, sales coaching could not be more important right now than any other time in sales history is you as the sales leader, whether you're a CRO, CSO, listening in and coaching your sellers directly, or you are a sales manager. You remember the good old days when we had what's called the Y connector? That's when we sat in a cube, new hires would come in, would sit down with our reps that are our top performers. They would listen in on calls, they'd plug into that Y connector. I don't even know if you can buy the Y connector anymore, but those days are long gone. You bring on a brand new sales rep, they are not sitting in an office with other people in a virtual selling environment and listening to what other people are saying. They're not. In fact, most sellers are trying to figure it out on their own. So how do we do that? How do we coach them to be better? Well, we're going to suggest to you that you should implement the OGC effect. What's the OGC effect? Well, it's a minimum expectation that you've got a minimum of 60 minutes per week per rep that you're doing the following types of things. So let's take a look at that. First off, the rep and the manager. Both reps and managers on a team should at least one time per week listen to, if you're the manager, to each rep's call. If you're the rep, to somebody else's call. Now, there are phenomenal tools that are out there. Ones that we use internally that we love is Gong, gong.io. So there are some great tools that allow you to be able to, quote, have that Y connector effect, where a rep can listen in on other reps' sales calls. In fact, we have a weekly sales enablement call here at Vingresso. Every week, every rep is required to listen to one other person's sales call. We talk about it for 30 minutes on our standing Friday call, and everybody needs to contribute to what they learned, what went well, what didn't work well. And we do that for 30 minutes with our sales team that we've got here at Vingresso. And as a leader, my responsibility is to listen to at least one call per rep per week and provide written, documented feedback on that particular call. Then what we do is we go to the team component. Now, the team then talks about it as a group. Now, this is that part I mentioned to you a second ago. So each person is required to listen to the call and they have to give documented feedback. But where it really comes to life is when you bring that to a group setting on your weekly calls. Take that half hour, just like I mentioned to you that we do for Vingresso, and bring that to the forefront of one of your sales meetings. We have our sales productivity and pipeline meeting at the beginning of the week, and we have our sales enablement meeting at the end of the week. So we separate our two calls. They're both 1 hour each, the beginning and the end of each week. And as a group, each member of the group goes around the horn and they give feedback on a particular call of what it is they learned or what it is they're going to take and adopt. This really helps with that group coaching that allows other people to learn from each other, not just from the leaders. Okay? And then we have what's called live virtual coaching. So what we'll do is we will have our sales leaders or myself, we're going to give one-on-one feedback. So we may listen to one, and then we may take it and say, I want to suggest a couple things for you. And we talk through that. So we use the on-demand component, which is through Gong. We use the group effect, which is as a team member. And then we use the individual coaching that we might give to a rep. Through these three methods, you are going to help your sellers improve dramatically with their selling skills. That's the goal, is leverage the O for on-demand, the G for group coaching, and the C for individual live coaching that you do with your sales team. Now, as sales leaders, it may seem quite daunting, especially if you have a team of 7 people, to actually do this for every rep for at least one call per week. That's what makes our job much more difficult in a virtual selling environment. If you're a director or a CRO, you also want to be doing this at least one time in a week. Pick a call, any call off of Gong or other platforms like Gong, where you can actually listen to a call and give documented written feedback. You might also pick up the phone and offer suggestions to that individual rep. But using the OGC will absolutely astronomically explode the learning that takes place as a group. And now your sellers don't feel like they're all by themselves. They are truly learning from each other, and the whole team is being raised up accordingly. So I've showed you this slide before. When we think about prospecting, customers don't want to be engaged through the old way of selling, where you cold call, you email blast, you attend networking events, you ask for a referral. Nope. They rather have the omni-channel way. We've showed you this slide before, where you're engaging through text messaging, social networks, digital referrals, gift marketing, or direct mail. The buyer engages you, or video. These elements are all new to our sales process. And guess what, sales leaders? In a remote selling environment, every one of these channels are being used. But most of us in a position of sales leadership are generally that 40 and older category, 45 and older, especially in the director level and above. And we didn't grow up selling this way. With that in mind, we've got to learn how to be able to create the engagement as well as deliver proper coaching to our sales team. And since we didn't use these channels, we've got to learn it, and we all have to do it as a team. And those three components that we just talked about, from ineffective sales engagement to ineffective sales training to ineffective sales coaching, if you change one or two or all three of them, you will have a dramatic set of results in helping everybody level the playing field in the omni-channel way. So make sure you don't keep continuing creating barriers using the old way. Guys, gals, step up to the plate. Learn the new ways, the omni-channel way that our buyers want to engage with sellers, which means we have to level up our game as sales leaders. For all of you guys to submit your best practice tips so that you can contribute to our guide. It's sales managers, directors, VPs, and CROs. So all of you, please submit your tips. A link there, vingresso.com/sales-managers. vingresso.com/sales-managers. Submit your best practice tip. And with that in mind, make sure you go to the PVC sales method. I'm going to open it up for Q&A. So let's take a look at what we've got. Got a bunch of questions inside here. What is the difference on this strategy for big sales teams versus small teams? There is absolutely no difference. We've implemented this strategy to the thousands of sales reps down to the 6-person sales team that we have here at Vingresso. All you have to do is take everything I showed you and push that downstream. So if you've got a sales team using like the OGC effect, you're obviously going to do it within a container of the 7 people on that team. And make sure that each of the sales managers are doing those types of things. Someone says, the OGC effect sounds great, but what if your manager has 17 direct reports and not just 7 direct reports? How can you overcome this challenge? It's a great question if you've got that many people. So first off, what I would say to you is the ratio of direct reports to manager should never be more than 10. There is a diminishing return. So you should probably go march to your sales VP and say, you need to give me 2 sales managers so I can actually effectively manage that team. Barring that, well, then you're going to have to do rotating schedule, which is basically week 1, you're doing half the team. Week 2, you're doing the other half the team, and you keep that going. That is the only way that we're going to get better. How do you find time to review sales calls when all sales reps are overloaded with leads? Well, if you're overloaded with leads, that's phenomenal. So that's one half the problem. But if you are trying to go through those calls, look, at the end of the day, what value are those leads to you? What value are those leads to you if you're not converting them? So you've got to be listening to what it is they say to get them to book the meeting and what it is they're saying to actually move the deal along. You have to find the time. There is not an option not to coach as a sales leader. And for me, that's why you saw on the OGC effect, it said listen at 1.5x. So I'll take an hour-long call and it turns into a 40-minute long call. So I'm trying to tighten that up. So just as a FYI. Let's see, one more minute. How to integrate the sales call strategy, not only for the sales team, but for the marketing team? Oh, that's a great question. So our marketing team actually listens into the sales calls as well, and including our content team. So our content team is listening, wanting to understand what is being asked so they can turn around and create appropriate content as well. So absolutely get your marketing team on that. And not a question, but a comment. In layman's terms, great job. Thank you, Doug. I appreciate that so much. So I think I answered all those questions. That was rapid fire.